Diane Martinez thought she was losing her mind. At 17, she'd wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. Her mother would find her hunched over the bathroom sink, tears streaming down her face, convinced she was dying. "Stop being so theatrical," Patricia Martinez would say, rolling her eyes. "You're perfectly healthy. Just breathe normally." But what Patricia didn't know was that her daughter's heart was hiding a secret that would change everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first episode happened during Diane's junior year at Roosevelt High School in Denver, Colorado. She was sitting in her AP chemistry class, dutifully taking notes about molecular structures, when suddenly the room began to spin. Her vision blurred at the edges, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over her like a cold wave. Her chest tightened, making each breath feel like she was breathing through a straw. "Miss Martinez, are you all right?" Mr. Henderson's voice sounded distant and muffled, as if he were speaking from underwater. Diane tried to respond, but no words came. Her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't hold her pen. The fluorescent lights above seemed blindingly bright, and every sound in the classroom, the scratch of pencils on paper, the rustle of pages, even the quiet hum of the ventilation system, felt amplified to an unbearable degree. I think I'm having a heart attack," she managed to whisper, clutching her chest. Mr. Henderson immediately called the school nurse, who arrived within minutes. Mrs. Coleman, a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes, knelt beside Diane's desk and took her pulse. "Your heart rate is elevated, sweetheart, but you're not having a heart attack," she said softly. "This looks like a panic attack. Let's get you to the nurse's office where it's quiet." The nurse's office became Diane's refuge over the next several months. The episodes continued with increasing frequency, sometimes twice a week, sometimes every day. Each time, Mrs. Coleman would sit with her, teaching her breathing exercises and offering reassurance. But every time Patricia Martinez was called to pick up her daughter, the same conversation would unfold. "She's fine," Patricia would tell Mrs. Coleman curtly. "Diane's always been dramatic. She gets this from her father's side of the family. They're all attention seekers." Patricia Martinez worked as a shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant, a job that had hardened her over the years. She'd grown up in a household where showing weakness was discouraged, where mental health was never discussed, and where physical symptoms without visible causes were dismissed as character flaws. In her world, you worked through pain, you didn't complain, and you certainly didn't let your emotions control you. "Mrs. Martinez," Mrs. Coleman would say gently, "panic attacks are real medical events. They're not something Diane can control or is doing for attention." "Panic attacks," Patricia would scoff. "In my day, we called that being spoiled. She needs to toughen up, not be coddled." At home, Patricia's approach was even more direct. When Diane would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping and crying, Patricia would appear in her doorway with crossed arms and an expression of barely contained irritation. "Enough with the drama, Diane. You're 17 years old, not 7. Breathe normally and go back to sleep." "Mom, please, something's really wrong," Diane would plead. "My heart feels like it's going to explode. I can't catch my breath." "Your heart is fine. You're just working yourself up over nothing. You know what your problem is? You spend too much time on that phone, filling your head with nonsense from the internet. All those teenagers online claiming they have anxiety disorders, it's just an excuse to avoid responsibility." Patricia would then launch into one of her familiar lectures about her own teenage years, how she worked 2 jobs while going to school, how she didn't have time for mental breakdowns because she had real responsibilities. "Mrs. Martinez," Mrs. Coleman would say gently, "panic attacks are real medical events. They're not something Diane can control or is doing for attention." "Panic attacks," Patricia would scoff. "In my day, we called that being spoiled. She needs to toughen up, not be coddled." At home, Patricia's approach was even more direct. When Diane would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping and crying, Patricia would appear in her doorway with crossed arms and an expression of barely contained irritation. "Enough with the drama, Diane. You're 17 years old, not 7. Breathe normally and go back to sleep." "Mom, please, something's really wrong," Diane would plead. "My heart feels like it's going to explode. I can't catch my breath." "Your heart is fine. You're just working yourself up over nothing. You know what your problem is? You spend too much time on that phone, filling your head with nonsense from the internet. All those teenagers online claiming they have anxiety disorders, it's just an excuse to avoid responsibility." Patricia would then launch into one of her familiar lectures about her own teenage years, how she worked 2 jobs while going to school, how she didn't have time for mental breakdowns because she had real responsibilities. These speeches would continue until Diane, exhausted and defeated, would retreat to her room and suffer through the episodes alone. The isolation was perhaps worse than the physical symptoms. Diane began to question her own experiences. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she was just being traumatic, seeking attention, making excuses. She stopped confiding in friends, stopped seeking help from teachers, and even began making excuses to avoid going to the nurse's office. The episodes, however, didn't stop. They evolved, becoming more complex and frightening. Sometimes Diane would experience what felt like electric shocks running down her arms. Other times, she'd feel dizzy and nauseous, as if the world were tilting beneath her feet. Most terrifying of all were the episodes where her heart would skip beats, creating a fluttering sensation in her chest that made her feel like her heart might simply stop working altogether. During one particularly severe episode at school, Diane collapsed in the hallway between classes. Students gathered around her as she lay on the cold linoleum floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. The school called an ambulance, and Diane was rushed to Denver General Hospital. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Sarah Williams, was thorough and kind. She ran an EKG, checked Diane's blood pressure, and ordered basic blood work. Everything came back normal. "I believe you're experiencing panic attacks," Dr. Williams explained to both Diane and Patricia. "They're very real and can be extremely frightening, but they're not dangerous." Patricia's response was predictable. "See, I told you there was nothing wrong with her. She's been doing this for months, disrupting school, causing scenes. Doctor, can you please explain to my daughter that she needs to stop this attention-seeking behavior?" Dr. Williams looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Martinez, panic attacks aren't attention-seeking behavior. They're a legitimate medical condition that can be treated with therapy and sometimes medication." "Medication?" Patricia's voice rose. "You want to put my 17-year-old daughter on psychiatric drugs because she can't handle normal teenage stress? Absolutely not." The ride home from the hospital was silent except for Patricia's occasional sighs of frustration. Once they were inside their small ranch-style house on Maple Street, the floodgates opened. "Diane, this has gone far enough," Patricia said, her voice sharp with anger. "I'm embarrassed. Do you know how it looks when my daughter gets carted off to the hospital in an ambulance because she can't control her emotions? My coworkers are asking questions. The neighbor saw the ambulance. This reflects on our entire family." "Mom, I can't help what's happening to me," Diane said, tears beginning to flow. "I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to have these episodes. I'm scared." "Scared of what? There's nothing wrong with you. The doctor just confirmed it. Your heart is fine, your blood work is fine, everything is fine. You're creating problems where none exist." Patricia paced around their small living room, her frustration building. The room was decorated with family photos and religious artifacts, crosses on the walls, a statue of the Virgin Mary on the mantel, remnants of Patricia's strict Catholic upbringing that emphasized suffering and silence in offering pain up to God. "You know what I think this is really about?" Patricia continued. "You're stressed about college applications, about your grades, about normal teenage things. Instead of dealing with them like a mature person, you're having these theatrical episodes to avoid responsibility." "That's not true," Diane protested weakly. "Isn't it? When's the last time you had one of these panic attacks during something fun? They always happen at school, during tests, during important events. It's convenient, don't you think?" The accusation hit Diane like a physical blow. The idea that she was somehow orchestrating these terrifying experiences for personal gain was so far from reality that she couldn't even formulate a response. Instead, she ran to her room and locked the door, sobbing into her pillow until exhaustion finally claimed her. Over the following weeks, Diane began to withdraw from everyone and everything. She stopped participating in class discussions, quit the debate team she'd loved since freshman year, and declined invitations to hang out with friends. The episodes continued, but she learned to hide them better, excusing herself to empty classrooms or bathroom stalls when she felt one coming on. At home, she and Patricia barely spoke. Their relationship, once close despite its challenges, had become strained to the breaking point. Patricia interpreted Diane's withdrawal as defiance, while Diane saw her mother's continued dismissal as proof that she was truly alone in her struggle. The breaking point came on a cold February morning. Diane was getting ready for school when an episode struck with unprecedented severity. This time, along with the familiar racing heart and shortness of breath, she experienced sharp, stabbing pains in her chest that radiated down her left arm. She collapsed in her bedroom, unable to call for help, convinced that this time she really was dying. Patricia found her 20 minutes later, curled up on the floor beside her bed, pale and shaking. "Not this again," Patricia muttered. But something about this episode was different. Diane's lips had a slightly blue tinge, and her breathing was more labored than Patricia had ever seen it. For the first time in months, doubt crept into Patricia's mind. What if she'd been wrong? What if there really was something medically wrong with her daughter? But the doubt was fleeting. As Diane slowly recovered, Patricia's familiar irritation returned. "Get up and get ready for school," she said firmly. "You're not missing another day because of this nonsense." Diane looked up at her mother with eyes that seemed older than her 17 years. Something had shifted in that moment on the floor. A resignation had settled over her, a quiet understanding that she truly was on her own. "Okay, Mom," she said quietly. "I'll get ready for school." But as Patricia left the room, Diane made a decision that would change the trajectory of her life. She was going to find answers, with or without her mother's support. She couldn't continue living in this limbo of dismissed symptoms and escalating fear. There had to be someone who would take her seriously, someone who would look deeper than a basic emergency room evaluation. What Diane didn't know was that her intuition was correct. Hidden within the chambers of her heart was an abnormality that had been silently growing more dangerous with each passing day, and time was running out for someone to discover it before it was too late. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Diane's secret research began that very afternoon. While Patricia was at work and her younger brother Miguel was at soccer practice, she commandeered the family computer in their cramped home office. The room doubled as Patricia's workspace for paying bills, cluttered with manila folders and outdated medical insurance paperwork that Patricia kept just in case. Her first searches were clumsy and broad: chest pain teenager, heart problems young people, when panic attacks aren't panic attacks. But as hours passed, Diane became more methodical. She discovered medical forums, research papers, and most importantly, personal accounts from other young people whose symptoms had been initially dismissed. One story in particular caught her attention. A 19-year-old college student named Marcus from Ohio had experienced similar episodes for 2 years. Like Diane, he'd been told repeatedly that he was having panic attacks. Unlike Diane, his parents had supported him in seeking multiple medical opinions. The fifth doctor he saw, a cardiologist specializing in young adult heart conditions, discovered he had a rare genetic condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Diane printed out every article she could find about the condition, hiding the papers in a shoebox under her bed. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she would read by flashlight, learning about heart muscle thickening, electrical conduction problems, and sudden cardiac death in young athletes. The more she read, the more convinced she became that her symptoms extended beyond typical panic attacks. The blue lips during her most recent episode, the sharp chest pains radiating down her arm, the sensation of her heart skipping beats, these aligned more closely with cardiac issues than anxiety disorders. But convincing Patricia remained impossible. Their dinner conversations had become exercises in careful neutrality, each woman avoiding topics that might trigger conflict. Miguel, now 15, and focused primarily on his social life and sports, seemed oblivious to the tension crackling between his mother and sister. "Diane's been quiet lately," he mentioned one evening while helping clear dishes. "Is she okay?" "Your sister is going through a phase," Patricia replied curtly. "She'll grow out of it." Diane excused herself from the table, retreating to her room where she continued her clandestine medical education. She learned about echocardiograms, stress tests, and Holter monitors. She discovered that many heart conditions in young people went undiagnosed for years because symptoms were often attributed to stress, anxiety, or growing pains. 3 weeks after her bedroom collapse, opportunity presented itself in an unexpected form. Diane's English teacher, Miss Jennifer Walsh, assigned a research project on social issues. While most students chose topics like climate change or social media addiction, Diane proposed researching healthcare disparities in teenage diagnosis. Miss Walsh was intrigued. "That's quite specific, Diane. What sparked your interest in this topic?" "I've been reading about how young people, especially girls, often have their medical symptoms dismissed," Diane replied carefully. "I think it's an important issue that doesn't get enough attention." The project gave Diane legitimate access to medical databases through the school's library system. She spent her lunch periods and free study halls conducting research that went far beyond her assignment requirements. She read about implicit bias in medicine, about how women and minorities were more likely to have their pain minimized, and about the specific challenges faced by teenagers whose symptoms didn't fit neat diagnostic categories. More importantly, she compiled a list of cardiologists in the Denver area who specialized in adolescent heart conditions. Dr. Michael Torres at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital had particularly impressive credentials, board-certified in pediatric cardiology with additional training in genetic heart conditions in young adults. The challenge was scheduling an appointment without Patricia's knowledge or consent. As a minor, Diane needed parental permission for most medical procedures. But she discovered that in Colorado, teenagers could seek certain medical care independently, particularly for mental health services and some preventive care. Diane called Dr. Torres's office from the school payphone during lunch, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Presbyterian Cardiology, this is Rebecca speaking." "Hi, I'm calling to schedule an appointment with Dr. Torres. I'm 17 and I've been having heart symptoms that I'd like to have evaluated." There was a pause. "Honey, you'll need your parents or guardians to call and schedule. We require parental consent for minors." Diane's heart sank, but she pressed on. "What if my parents don't believe there's anything wrong with me? Is there any way I can be seen independently?" Rebecca's voice softened with understanding. "Let me transfer you to our patient advocate. She might have some options for you." 20 minutes later, Diane had learned about the hospital's adolescent advocacy program. If she could demonstrate mature decision-making capacity, and if the consultation was deemed medically necessary, she could potentially be seen without immediate parental consent, though her parents would eventually need to be informed. The process required a preliminary phone screening with a social worker, Dr. Lisa Hoffman, who would assess whether Diane's situation warranted independent medical evaluation. The call was scheduled for the following Thursday during her study hall. She found an empty classroom and closed the door, her hands trembling as she answered Dr. Hoffman's call. "Tell me about your symptoms and your situation at home," Dr. Hoffman said gently. Diane poured out her story, the months of episodes, the emergency room visit, her mother's dismissal of her concerns, her growing fear that something serious was being overlooked. "Have you tried talking to your mother about seeing a specialist?" Dr. Hoffman asked. "She thinks I'm being dramatic. She says the ER doctor already confirmed nothing's wrong with me. But Dr. Hoffman, I've been researching. Emergency room evaluations are basic. They only catch obvious problems, right? What if there's something subtle that needs specialized testing?" Dr. Hoffman was quiet for a moment. "Diane, you've clearly done your homework. Your reasoning is sound. Emergency evaluations are designed to rule out immediate life-threatening conditions, not necessarily to catch subtle abnormalities. Let me ask you this. If we could arrange for you to see Dr. Torres, and if something were found that required treatment or lifestyle changes, would you be prepared to have that conversation with your mother?" "Yes," Diane said without hesitation. "If there's really something wrong with me, she'll have to listen then, won't she?" The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday afternoon. Diane would leave school early, ostensibly for a dentist appointment. The consultation would be covered by the family's insurance, though the explanation of benefits would be mailed to their home address, a complication Diane decided to worry about later. That weekend, Diane experienced 2 more episodes. The first occurred while she was doing laundry, a task she'd volunteered for to help around the house and perhaps earn some goodwill from Patricia. She was folding towels when the familiar sensation began, the tightening in her chest, the racing heartbeat, the overwhelming sense of impending doom. But this time, she observed her symptoms with clinical detachment, mentally cataloging each sensation for her upcoming appointment. The episode lasted 12 minutes. She timed it. Her heart rate, measured by counting her pulse against the laundry room clock, reached approximately 180 beats per minute. Most concerning, she experienced what she now recognized as potential arrhythmia, periods where her heartbeat felt irregular, with occasional skipped beats followed by compensatory harder beats. The second episode happened during Sunday dinner as the family sat around their small dining table sharing Patricia's homemade enchiladas. The attack came without warning, causing Diane to gasp and clutch her chest mid-conversation. Patricia's reaction was swift and sharp. "Not at the dinner table, Diane. Show some respect for your family." But Miguel surprised everyone by speaking up. "Mom, she looks really pale. Maybe she should see a doctor." "She's seen doctors," Patricia snapped. "They've all said the same thing. There's nothing wrong with her physically." "But what if they missed something?" Miguel persisted. "What if—" "Miguel, finish your dinner and stay out of grown-up conversations." Diane excused herself, but not before catching Miguel's concerned expression. Later that evening, he knocked on her bedroom door. "Diane, can I come in?" She opened the door to find her brother holding 2 ice cream sandwiches from the freezer. "I thought you might want this," he said, offering her one. "You didn't finish dinner." They sat on her bed in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Miguel spoke again. "Are you really okay? I mean, really okay?" It was the first time in months that anyone in her family had asked her that question with genuine concern rather than frustration. "I don't know, Miguel. I hope I'm just being dramatic, like Mom says, but what if I'm not?" "Have you tried talking to the school counselor, or maybe asking to see a different doctor?" Diane considered telling him about her upcoming appointment, but decided against it. If things went badly, she didn't want Miguel to be caught in the middle of the inevitable conflict with Patricia. "I'm working on it," she said instead. "Thanks for caring." Monday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for early March. Diane dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her look older and more mature. She'd prepared a list of her symptoms, their frequency, and their severity. She'd researched questions to ask Dr. Torres and had even practiced describing her episodes in medical terminology. During her morning classes, she found it difficult to concentrate. Her chemistry teacher returned their most recent exam. She'd earned a B+, usually a source of pride, but today it felt irrelevant compared to what the afternoon might reveal. At 1:15 p.m., Diane signed out of school at the main office, claiming a dental appointment. She caught the public bus to Presbyterian/St. Joseph Hospital, her stomach churning with anticipation and anxiety. The cardiology wing was quieter than she'd expected, decorated in soothing blues and greens with comfortable seating areas. At the reception desk, she gave her name to Rebecca, the same woman she'd spoken to on the phone. "Dr. Torres will see you shortly, honey. Just have a seat and try to relax." Diane sat in the waiting area, watching other patients, mostly older adults, a few parents with young children, and one teenager who looked to be about her age, accompanied by both parents. She envied that teenager's family support, while simultaneously hoping that whatever was wrong with her could be easily fixed. At 2:30 p.m., a tall man with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples emerged from the corridor. "Diane Martinez, I'm Dr. Torres. Thank you for coming in today." As she followed him toward his office, Diane felt a mixture of hope and terror. After months of being dismissed and doubted, she was finally going to be heard by someone who specialized in the very organ she suspected was causing her problems. What she didn't know was that within the next hour, Dr. Torres would discover something that would validate every concern she'd harbored and change her life forever. Dr. Torres's office was nothing like the sterile emergency room where Diane had been dismissed months earlier. Warm wooden furniture, medical diplomas covering one wall, and photographs of smiling young patients created an atmosphere of competence mixed with compassion. A large anatomical model of a heart sat on his desk, its chambers and vessels meticulously detailed in red and blue. "Please, have a seat," Dr. Torres said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I understand from Dr. Hoffman that you've been experiencing some concerning symptoms, and that you've taken quite a bit of initiative to get here today." Diane pulled out the carefully prepared notes from her backpack, her hands steadier than she'd expected. "I've been having episodes for about 8 months now. Everyone keeps saying they're panic attacks, but I've done research, and some of my symptoms don't match typical anxiety presentations." Dr. Torres raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by her articulate approach. "Tell me about these symptoms. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." For the next 20 minutes, Diane recounted her medical journey in chronological order. Dr. Torres took detailed notes, occasionally asking specific questions that demonstrated he was truly listening. "You mentioned blue lips during your most recent episode. Can you describe that more precisely?" "It was just around the edges at first. Then my fingernails started looking bluish too. It lasted maybe 10 minutes after the chest pain stopped." "And these episodes where your heart feels like it's skipping beats? Can you describe the pattern?" "It's like a thump, thump, pause, thump really hard. Then back to normal rhythm. Sometimes it happens 3 or 4 times during one episode." Dr. Torres set down his pen and looked directly at her. "Diane, I want you to know that what you've described concerns me, and I'm glad you trusted your instincts to seek specialized care. Blue lips and the irregular heartbeat pattern you've described can indicate insufficient oxygen delivery to your tissues, which isn't typical of panic attacks." Relief flooded through Diane so powerfully that tears sprung to her eyes. "So I'm not crazy? I'm not just being dramatic?" "You are absolutely not crazy, and your symptoms warrant thorough investigation. However, I need to be clear about something important. Because you're here without parental consent, I can perform the initial evaluation and some basic tests today, but if we find anything requiring treatment, we'll need to involve your mother immediately." Diane nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I just needed someone to take me seriously first." Dr. Torres led her to an examination room where a medical technician, James, was setting up equipment. "We're going to start with an electrocardiogram to look at your heart's electrical activity, then do an echocardiogram to visualize the structure and function of your heart chambers." The EKG took only a few minutes. James attached electrodes to Diane's chest, arms, and legs, while Dr. Torres studied the readout on a small monitor. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Diane noticed his brow furrow slightly as he examined the tracings. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Let's get the echo done before we discuss anything," Dr. Torres replied diplomatically. "The more information we have, the better I can explain what we're seeing." The echocardiogram was more complex. Diane lay on her side while James applied gel to her chest and maneuvered an ultrasound probe across her ribs. On a larger monitor, grainy black and white images appeared, cross-sections of her heart chambers contracting and relaxing in real time. Dr. Torres moved closer to the screen, using a computer mouse to take measurements at various points. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic whooshing sound of blood flow through her heart valves, amplified by the machine's speakers. "Diane, I want you to see this," Dr. Torres said, pointing to the monitor. "This is your left ventricle, the main pumping chamber of your heart. See how thick this wall is compared to this reference measurement." He showed her normal thickness parameters on the screen, then highlighted her measurements in red. Even to Diane's untrained eye, the difference was obvious. "Your left ventricular wall is significantly thickened, what we call left ventricular hypertrophy. This is causing the symptoms you've been experiencing." Diane stared at the images of her heart, simultaneously vindicated and terrified. "Is it serious?" "It can be, but the fact that we've caught it now is very good news. This condition is called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's often genetic, meaning it runs in families, and it affects about 1 in 500 people. Many people have it without knowing, but you've been experiencing symptoms because the thickened muscle is affecting your heart's ability to pump efficiently and maintain proper rhythm. Dr. Torres spent the next 30 minutes explaining the condition in detail. The thickened heart muscle could obstruct blood flow, cause irregular heartbeats, and in severe cases lead to sudden cardiac arrest. However, with proper monitoring and treatment, most people with the condition lived normal, active lives. What kind of treatment? Diane asked. That depends on several factors we still need to evaluate. You'll need genetic testing to confirm the diagnosis and identify the specific mutation. We'll also need to do more detailed imaging and possibly a stress test to see how your heart responds to exercise. Some patients need medications to help their heart pump more efficiently. Others might need procedures to reduce the muscle thickness. The weight of this information was overwhelming, but Diane felt an unexpected sense of relief. After months of being told she was imagining things, having a concrete diagnosis felt like liberation. Dr. Torres, what about my family? Should they be tested too? Absolutely. If this is genetic, your parents and siblings have a 50% chance of carrying the same mutation. Often, family members have the condition but no symptoms. As if summoned by the mention of family, Dr. Torres' expression grew more serious. Diane, we need to call your mother now. This is a significant medical finding that requires immediate family involvement and ongoing care. Diane's stomach tightened. She's going to be so angry that I came here without telling her. She might be initially upset, but once she understands the seriousness of your condition, I believe she'll be grateful you advocated for yourself. Would you like me to call her, or would you prefer to do it? Could you call her? I think she'll take it more seriously coming from a doctor. Dr. Torres nodded and picked up his office phone. What's her work number? Patricia answered on the second ring. Denver Manufacturing, Patricia Martinez speaking. Mrs. Martinez, this is Dr. Michael Torres, a cardiologist at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. Your daughter Diane is in my office and I need you to come here immediately. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Patricia's voice exploded through the phone speaker. What do you mean my daughter is in your office? She's supposed to be at school. What has she done now? Mrs. Martinez, Diane sought medical evaluation for cardiac symptoms she's been experiencing. I've completed some tests and we found a significant heart condition that requires immediate discussion and planning. Another pause, then Patricia's voice, noticeably quieter. Heart condition? But the emergency room doctor said her heart was fine. Emergency room evaluations are designed to rule out immediate life-threatening conditions. They don't typically catch structural abnormalities like what Diane has. Can you come to the hospital now? We're in the cardiology wing, suite 420. Yes, I'll be there as soon as I can. After Dr. Torres hung up, he turned to Diane with a reassuring smile. She's coming. While we wait, let me show you some educational materials about your condition so you can help explain it to her. For the next 40 minutes, Dr. Torres educated Diane about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy using diagrams, patient pamphlets, and even a video that showed how the thickened heart muscle could obstruct blood flow. She learned about activity restrictions she'd need to follow, warning signs to watch for, and the importance of regular cardiac monitoring. Will I be able to play sports, go to college normally, have children someday? With proper management, you should be able to live a full life. Some high-intensity sports might be restricted, but we'll evaluate that after more testing. College, career, family, all of that should be possible. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Patricia entered, still wearing her work uniform, her face flushed and her expression a mixture of confusion, anger, and worry. Diane Maria Martinez, what in the world is going on here? Dr. Torres stood and extended his hand. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Dr. Torres. Please, have a seat. We have important things to discuss. Patricia remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. Doctor, my daughter has been having what everyone agrees are panic attacks. She's been to the emergency room, she's been evaluated. I don't understand why she's here wasting your time and our money. Mrs. Martinez, your daughter doesn't have panic attacks. She has a genetic heart condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Her symptoms have been cardiac in origin all along. The words seemed to hit Patricia like a physical blow. She sank into the chair beside Diane, her face draining of color. A heart condition? But they said she was fine. Dr. Torres pulled up Diane's echocardiogram images on his computer screen. Let me show you what we found. As he explained the diagnosis, using the same diagrams and explanations he'd shared with Diane, Patricia's expression transformed. The defensive anger melted away, replaced by shock, guilt, and growing horror at the implications of months of dismissing her daughter's symptoms. You mean, every time she said something was wrong with her heart, she was right? Yes, Mrs. Martinez, Diane's instincts about her body were absolutely correct. Patricia turned to look at her daughter, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Diane, I don't know what to say. But before Diane could respond, Dr. Torres continued with information that would reshape their entire family's future. Mrs. Martinez, there's something else you need to know. This condition is genetic. You and your son Miguel should both be evaluated as soon as possible. You might have the same condition without symptoms. The room fell silent as the full scope of the situation settled over them. What had started as Diane's individual struggle had suddenly become a family medical crisis that would require genetic testing, lifestyle changes, and ongoing cardiac monitoring for potentially all three of them. Patricia reached over and took Diane's hand for the first time in months, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." The drive home from the hospital was unlike any car ride the Martinez family had ever shared. Patricia sat behind the wheel, her hands gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white, while Diane stared out the passenger window at the Denver suburbs passing by. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across familiar neighborhoods that somehow looked different now, as if the diagnosis had altered not just their understanding of Diane's health, but their perception of everything around them. "We need to tell Miguel as soon as we get home," Patricia finally said, breaking the 20-minute silence. Her voice was hoarse from crying in Dr. Torres's office. He needs to understand what this means for him, too. Diane nodded, clutching the folder of medical information and appointment cards Dr. Torres had given them. The genetic counseling appointment was scheduled for Friday, and Miguel's cardiac screening for the following Monday. Patricia had taken the rest of the week off work, something she'd never done, even when she'd had the flu last year. Miguel was in the kitchen making an after-school snack when they walked through the front door. He took one look at their faces and froze, a peanut butter sandwich halfway to his mouth. What happened? Did somebody die? Patricia sat down heavily at the kitchen table, gesturing for Miguel to join them. "Sit down, mijo. We need to talk about something important." Over the next hour, Patricia and Diane tag-teamed the explanation. Patricia handled the medical basics, while Diane filled in details about her months of symptoms and research. Miguel listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions that showed he was processing the gravity of the situation. "So, this whole time, when you were having those episodes and Mom thought you were—" he trailed off, glancing nervously at Patricia. "Being dramatic," Patricia finished for him, her voice heavy with regret. "Yes, this whole time your sister was actually sick, and I was too stubborn and ignorant to see it." Miguel reached across the table and squeezed Diane's hand. "I'm sorry I didn't stick up for you more. I should have insisted Mom take you to more doctors." "You were 15, Miguel. This wasn't your responsibility," Diane replied, but she was touched by his support. That evening, Patricia did something she hadn't done in years. She called her own mother, Esperanza, who lived in El Paso. The conversation was conducted in rapid Spanish, with Patricia pacing around the living room as she explained the situation. Diane, whose Spanish was decent but not fluent, caught enough to understand that Esperanza was asking about family medical history. "Abuela wants to know if anyone in our family ever had heart problems," Patricia said after hanging up. "She doesn't remember anyone, but she's going to call my uncles and aunts to ask around." The genetic counseling appointment on Friday revealed information that stunned them all.
Dr. Rebecca Chen, the genetic counselor, explained that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy could manifest differently in family members or might not manifest at all despite carrying the genetic mutation. Some people with the gene never develop symptoms, Dr. Chen explained. Others, like Diane, develop them in their teens or early 20s. Still others don't show symptoms until their middle age, often triggered by pregnancy, intense athletic training, or other stressors. The blood draws for genetic testing were quick, but the results wouldn't be available for 6 weeks. In the meantime, both Patricia and Miguel were scheduled for their own cardiac evaluations. Miguel's appointment the following Monday brought unexpected drama. His echocardiogram showed mild left ventricular thickening, less severe than Diane's, but definitely abnormal. Dr. Torres recommended activity restrictions and quarterly monitoring. "I can't play soccer anymore?" Miguel asked, his voice cracking with disappointment. "Not competitively," Dr. Torres said gently. "High-intensity sports carry risks for people with your condition, but you can still play recreationally, swim, bike, and do most normal activities."
Miguel took the news harder than anyone had expected. Soccer wasn't just a sport for him. It was his social circle, his college scholarship hopes, his identity. That night, Diane found him crying in his room, staring at his collection of soccer trophies and team photos. "I know it sucks," she said, sitting on his bed. "But Miguel, at least we know now. At least we can be safe." "Easy for you to say. You never wanted to play college sports." Diane was quiet for a moment. "You're right, but Miguel, what if you'd collapsed during a game? What if you died on the field because we didn't know?" The harshness of her words seemed to break through his self-pity. Miguel wiped his eyes and looked at her seriously. "Is that what could have happened to you? All those times you had episodes?" "Dr. Torres says it's possible. If the irregular heartbeats had gotten worse, if I'd pushed myself too hard during an episode," she shrugged. "We got lucky." Patricia's evaluation brought the biggest surprise of all. Her echocardiogram was completely normal, with no signs of heart muscle thickening. Dr. Torres seemed puzzled, but explained that this occasionally happened in families with genetic heart conditions. "It's possible Patricia doesn't carry the gene mutation, or she carries a different variant that doesn't affect heart structure," he explained during their follow-up appointment 2 weeks later. "We'll know more when the genetic results come back." The 6 weeks waiting for genetic test results transformed their family dynamics completely. Patricia, racked with guilt over months of dismissing Diane's symptoms, became almost overprotective. She insisted on driving Diane to and from school, monitored her activities constantly, and called Dr. Torres's office with questions almost daily. "Mom, you're suffocating me," Diane finally said one evening when Patricia insisted on sleeping on the couch outside Diane's room in case she had an episode during the night. "I almost lost you because I wasn't paying attention," Patricia replied. "I won't make that mistake again." But gradually, their relationship found a new equilibrium. Patricia enrolled in a CPR class at the local community center. She researched heart-healthy recipes and transformed their family's diet, despite Miguel's complaints about the lack of fried foods. Most importantly, she started really listening when Diane spoke about her symptoms, her fears, and her needs. The genetic test results arrived on a Tuesday in early May. Dr. Torres called them in for a family meeting to discuss the findings. "Diane, you tested positive for a mutation in the MYBPC3 gene, which is one of the most common causes of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," he announced. "Miguel, you have the same mutation, which explains your cardiac changes." He paused and looked at Patricia. "Patricia, your test was negative for this specific mutation. However, since both your children have it, we know it had to come from either you or their father." Patricia frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you likely carry a different genetic variant that we haven't identified yet, or there was a spontaneous mutation in one of your children that then passed to the other. We may never know for certain, but it doesn't change the management for Diane and Miguel." The summer brought new routines and perspectives. Diane started taking a daily medication called a beta blocker that helped regulate her heart rhythm and reduce her symptoms dramatically. The terrifying episodes that had plagued her for nearly a year became rare occurrences. Miguel joined the swim team instead of soccer and discovered he actually enjoyed the individual nature of the sport.
He also became passionate about cardiac health advocacy, giving presentations at school about recognizing heart problems in young athletes. Patricia's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. She enrolled in community college courses in healthcare administration, inspired by her experience navigating the medical system for her children. Her goal was to eventually work in patient advocacy, helping other families avoid the months of dismissed symptoms they'd endured. Patricia told Diane one evening as they worked together on Patricia's homework, "I want to make sure no other parent makes the mistakes I made." But the most significant change was in how they communicated as a family. The crisis had stripped away years of accumulated resentments and defensive patterns, leaving them with a hard-won appreciation for honesty and vulnerability. One evening in late July, as they sat on their small back patio watching Miguel swim in their neighbor's pool, Patricia turned to Diane with tears in her eyes. "I keep thinking about all those nights you were scared and in pain, and I just told you to breathe normally," she said. "How do I forgive myself for that?" Diane took her mother's hand. "Mom, you didn't know. You were doing your best with the information you had. The important thing is that we know now, and we're all going to be okay." Patricia squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. "I'm so proud of you for not giving up, for pushing until you found answers. You saved your own life, and probably Miguel's too." As summer turned to fall, Diane started her senior year of high school with a new perspective on life. Her college applications included essays about medical advocacy and self-determination. She decided to pursue pre-med studies, inspired by her experience with Dr. Torres and driven by a desire to help other young people whose symptoms might be dismissed. The episodes that had once terrified her into thinking she was dying had led her to discover not just a treatable medical condition, but also her own strength, her family's capacity for growth, and her calling in life. Sometimes, the scariest moments, she reflected, were actually the beginning of the most important journeys. 6 months after that first appointment with Dr. Torres, the Martinez family had become passionate advocates for cardiac screening in teenagers and for trusting young people when they reported persistent symptoms. They'd learned that sometimes the most important thing a family can do is listen, really listen, when someone says something is wrong. And sometimes the person who seems to be causing the most drama is actually the one fighting hardest to save their own life. 2 years later, Diane Martinez stood in the lecture hall of the University of Colorado Denver's medical school, addressing a crowd of first-year medical students, residents, and attending physicians. At 19, she was younger than most of the audience, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through what many of them had only read about in textbooks. She said, "Show of hands," scanning the packed auditorium. "How many of you have dismissed a teenage patient's complaints as anxiety, stress, or attention-seeking behavior?" About half the hands in the room went up, some hesitantly, others with confident acknowledgement. "Thank you for your honesty. Now, how many of you have considered that the teenage patient might know their body better than you think they do?" This time, fewer hands rose. Diane clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing her own echocardiogram images from that day 2 years ago. "This is my heart. When I was 17, it nearly killed me, not because of the condition itself, but because multiple healthcare providers dismissed my symptoms for 8 months." The room was completely silent now. Dr. Torres sat in the front row, beaming with pride at his former patient who had become a powerful advocate for diagnostic humility in medicine. Diane's journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. Her freshman year at UC Denver had been challenging, not just academically, but medically. Despite the beta-blocker medication, she still experienced occasional episodes, particularly during times of stress like midterm exams. She'd learned to manage them better, but they served as constant reminders of her condition. The real turning point came during her Introduction to Healthcare Systems class, when Professor Amanda Richardson assigned students to interview healthcare professionals about diagnostic challenges. Diane had requested to interview Dr. Torres, expecting a routine conversation about cardiology. Instead, Dr. Torres had surprised her with a proposition. "Diane, I've been thinking about your case a lot over the past year," he'd said during their meeting in his office. "Not just medically, but what it represents about how we sometimes fail young patients. Would you be interested in helping me develop a presentation for medical conferences about adolescent cardiac symptoms and diagnostic bias?"
That collaboration had evolved into something much larger. Diane discovered she had a talent for translating complex medical concepts into accessible language and for challenging healthcare providers to examine their own assumptions about young patients. Her presentation that day covered three main themes: the importance of taking teenage patients seriously, the limitations of emergency department evaluations for complex conditions, and the role of patient advocacy in achieving accurate diagnoses. "I want to tell you about Marcus Chen," Diane said, clicking a photo of a young Asian man in a hospital gown. "Marcus contacted me through the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association website last year. He was 21, a junior at Stanford, and had been experiencing chest pain and shortness of breath for 3 years." The audience leaned forward, engaged by her storytelling approach. Marcus had been to 5 different emergency departments over those 3 years. Each time, he was told he was having panic attacks related to academic stress. Each time, he was discharged with recommendations for anxiety management and stress reduction. Diane paused for effect. Marcus collapsed during a computer science exam last October. He went into ventricular fibrillation. Essentially, his heart stopped beating effectively. If not for an AED in the classroom and a professor who knew CPR, Marcus would have died. She clicked to the next slide, showing Marcus's echocardiogram. Marcus had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, just like me. But unlike me, his condition had progressed to the point where it caused a life-threatening arrhythmia. 3 years of dismissed symptoms nearly cost him his life. Dr. Sarah Kim, a second-year cardiology resident in the audience, raised her hand. What could have been done differently? Emergency departments see hundreds of chest pain complaints. How do we distinguish between anxiety and cardiac conditions in young patients? Diane smiled, grateful for the question. That's exactly what we need to discuss. The answer isn't necessarily ordering echocardiograms for every teenager with chest pain, but it is about asking better questions, taking detailed histories, and most importantly, believing patients when they tell you something feels different or wrong with their bodies. She clicked a slide showing a decision tree she'd developed with Dr. Torres. "We've created a screening protocol that emergency departments can use. Simple questions. Are your symptoms reproducible with exercise? Do you have a family history of sudden cardiac death? Have you ever fainted during physical activity?" These questions can help identify which young patients need cardiology referrals. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, with Diane sharing stories of other young people whose cardiac conditions had been initially misdiagnosed. She'd connected with dozens of families through support groups and social media, each with variations of the same story: symptoms dismissed, months or years of uncertainty, and eventual diagnosis only after persistent advocacy or medical crisis. After the presentation, Diane was approached by Dr. Maria Santos, the chief of pediatric cardiology at Children's Hospital Colorado. "That was remarkable," Dr. Santos said. "Have you considered applying to our summer research program? We're developing new protocols for cardiac screening in adolescents, and your perspective would be invaluable." This opportunity led to Diane's first published research paper, co-authored with Dr. Torres and Dr. Santos, examining diagnostic delays in adolescent cardiomyopathy patients. The study, published in the Journal of Adolescent Health, found that young people with cardiac conditions waited an average of 14 months for accurate diagnoses, with symptoms being attributed to psychological causes in 78% of cases. The research gained national attention, leading to invitations for Diane to speak at medical conferences across the country. Her message was consistent. Young people's medical concerns deserved the same consideration as adults, and diagnostic humility was crucial in preventing delayed diagnoses. But Diane's advocacy work extended beyond academic medicine. She'd also become involved with the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Foundation, working to promote cardiac screening programs in high schools. Her personal story had become a powerful tool for educating parents, teachers, and coaches about recognizing cardiac symptoms in young athletes. One particularly meaningful opportunity came when she was invited to speak at Miguel's former high school. Miguel, now a college sophomore studying exercise physiology, introduced her to the assembled students and parents. "2 years ago, my sister Diane saved not just her own life, but mine too," Miguel said. "She didn't accept being dismissed. She didn't stop advocating for herself. And because of her persistence, we discovered that I had the same condition."
Miguel had thrived in college, focusing his studies on cardiac rehabilitation and sports medicine. His own experience with activity restrictions had inspired him to help other young athletes adapt to limitations while maintaining active lifestyles. He'd already been accepted to several graduate programs in exercise physiology, with plans to specialize in cardiac patients. Patricia's transformation had been equally remarkable. She'd completed her associate's degree in healthcare administration and was now working as a patient advocate at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, the same hospital where Diane had been diagnosed. Her role involved helping patients navigate complex medical systems and ensuring that concerns weren't dismissed or overlooked. "I see families going through what we went through," Patricia often told Diane during their weekly phone calls. "Young patients whose symptoms are being minimized, parents who don't know how to advocate effectively. I try to be the voice I wish I'd had during those 8 months when you were suffering." Patricia had also become a vocal advocate for healthcare provider education about implicit bias in medical settings. She spoke regularly at nursing conferences and medical staff meetings about her experience dismissing her daughter's symptoms and the lessons she'd learned. The Martinez family story had become something of a case study in medical education circles, not just for the diagnostic aspects, but for the family dynamics and communication breakdowns that contributed to delayed diagnoses. They'd agreed to be interviewed for medical school curricula, sharing their story to help train future physicians about the importance of family-centered care and patient advocacy. As Diane finished her presentation that day at the medical school, she reflected on how profoundly her life had changed since that terrifying morning when she'd collapsed in her bedroom. What had started as a frightening medical crisis had evolved into a calling that combined her personal experience with her academic interests. She was now a junior at UC Denver, majoring in biomedical engineering with a focus on cardiac devices. Her senior thesis project involved developing a wearable monitor that could detect early signs of cardiac arrhythmias in young people, essentially a device that could provide the objective evidence that might have led to her earlier diagnosis.
The most important lesson from my experience, Diane concluded her presentation, isn't just about diagnostic protocols or screening guidelines. It's about the fundamental principle that patients, regardless of age, are experts on their own bodies. When someone tells you repeatedly that something is wrong, especially when symptoms are consistent and concerning, the appropriate response isn't dismissal, it's an investigation. As the audience applauded, Diane spotted her parents in the back of the auditorium. Patricia had taken time off work to attend, and her face was wet with tears of pride. The daughter she'd once accused of being dramatic was now educating physicians about the very condition she'd dismissed. After the event, as they walked across campus together, Patricia put her arm around Diane's shoulders. "I still can't believe how far we've all come," she said. 2 years ago, I thought I knew everything about parenting, about medicine, about life. You taught me that the people we love most are sometimes the ones who can teach us the most, if we're willing to listen." Diane smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of her heart that no longer terrified her, but instead reminded her of the journey that had brought them to this moment. Sometimes, the most frightening experiences led to the most meaningful destinations. Her next goal was medical school, where she planned to specialize in cardiology. But unlike many future physicians, she'd already learned the most important lesson of all: never underestimate the power of a patient who refuses to be silenced. 5 years after her first terrifying episode in chemistry class, Dr. Diane Martinez walked through the corridors of Johns Hopkins Hospital wearing her white coat with pride. At 24, she was in her second year of cardiology fellowship, having fast-tracked through medical school with the intensity of someone who'd found their life's purpose early. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked in the same type of emergency department where her symptoms had once been dismissed. But instead of bitterness, she carried with her a deep understanding of the pressures and limitations that led to diagnostic oversights. "Dr. Martinez, we have a 17-year-old in Bay 6, called out Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the attending physician. Chest pain, shortness of breath, 3rd visit this month. Previous workups were negative." Diane felt a familiar tightness in her chest, not from her condition, which was now well controlled with medication and regular monitoring, but from the recognition of a story she knew too well. The patient was Emma Thompson, a high school senior from Baltimore who sat on the examination table looking exhausted and frustrated. Her mother, Sandra, stood beside her with the weary expression of someone who'd spent months seeking answers. "Hi, Emma. I'm Dr. Martinez," Diane said, settling into a chair at eye level with the teenager. "I see you've been having some concerning symptoms. Can you tell me about them in your own words?" Emma's story unfolded with painful familiarity, episodes of rapid heartbeat, chest tightness, and overwhelming dread that struck without warning. Previous physicians had attributed the symptoms to college application stress and recommended anxiety counseling. "The thing is," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it doesn't feel like anxiety. I know what that feels like. I had anxiety before my SATs, and this is completely different. This feels like something's wrong with my body." Diane exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Walsh. Over the past 2 years, Diane had developed a reputation at Johns Hopkins for her exceptional diagnostic skills with young patients, particularly those whose symptoms had been previously dismissed. "Emma, I'd like to ask you some specific questions that might help us figure this out," Diane said, pulling out a tablet with the screening protocol she'd refined since her days as an undergraduate advocate. The questions revealed several red flags that previous evaluations had missed. Emma's episodes were consistently triggered by physical exertion, she'd experienced near fainting during gym class, and her maternal grandfather had died suddenly of a heart attack at age 32, a detail that had been overlooked in previous histories. "I'd like to do an echocardiogram," Diane told Sandra. "Given Emma's symptoms and family history, we should take a closer look at her heart structure." Sandra's relief was palpable. Finally, someone who's taking her seriously. You have no idea what it's been like, watching her suffer while everyone tells us it's just stress. An hour later, Diane was staring at echocardiogram images that confirmed her suspicions. Emma had the same condition that had nearly derailed Diane's own life, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, with significant left ventricular thickening that could explain all her symptoms. As Diane explained the diagnosis to Emma and Sandra, she felt the profound satisfaction that came with preventing another family from enduring months of dismissed concerns and escalating fear. "Will she be okay?" Sandra asked, tears streaming down her face. "With proper treatment and monitoring, Emma should be able to live a normal life," Diane assured her. "The key is that we caught it now before any serious complications occurred." Later that evening, Diane video called her family for their weekly check-in. Patricia appeared on screen from her home office, where she was working on a presentation for a patient advocacy conference. Miguel joined from his apartment near the University of Colorado, where he was completing his master's degree in exercise physiology. "Guess what happened today?" Diane said. "I diagnosed another teenager with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Third one this year." Patricia shook her head in amazement. It's incredible how common this is once you know what to look for. How many of these kids would have gone undiagnosed if you weren't there? "That's exactly why the work you're both doing is so important," Miguel added. "Mom, your patient advocacy program has helped how many families now?" Patricia smiled proudly. "We've assisted over 300 families in the past 2 years. Last month, we prevented a teenager from being discharged from the ER with anxiety when she actually had a pulmonary embolism." The conversation turned to Miguel's own exciting news. He'd been accepted to a PhD program in cardiac rehabilitation research at Stanford, with funding to study exercise protocols for young people with inherited heart conditions. "I want to develop programs that help kids like us stay active safely," Miguel explained. "Just because we have cardiac conditions doesn't mean we have to be sedentary. We just need smarter approaches to fitness." As they talked, Diane reflected on how their individual journeys had intertwined to create something larger than any of them could have accomplished alone. Patricia's patient advocacy work had influenced hospital policies, Miguel's research was changing how young cardiac patients approach exercise, and Diane's clinical work was directly preventing other families from experiencing the trauma they'd endured. The conversation was interrupted by Diane's phone buzzing with a text message from Dr. Torres. "Saw the news about your research grant. Congratulations. Looking forward to seeing the cardiac screening app you develop." Diane had just been awarded a significant grant from the National Institutes of Health to develop a smartphone application that could help primary care physicians screen for cardiac conditions in adolescents.
The app would use artificial intelligence to analyze symptom patterns and family histories, flagging cases that warrant cardiology referral. Dr. Torres says congratulations on the research grant, Diane told her family. That man changed our lives, Patricia said softly. Have I ever told you that I sent him a Christmas card every year?
After the call ended, Diane walked to her bedroom dresser and opened the top drawer, where she kept a small wooden box filled with mementos from her journey. Inside were her original handwritten notes from that first appointment with Dr. Torres, the printouts of research articles she'd hidden under her bed as a teenager, and dozens of thank you letters from families whose stories paralleled her own. The most recent addition was a letter from Marcus Chen, the Stanford student whose story she'd shared in her medical school presentations. Marcus had graduated with his computer science degree and was now working at a tech company developing health monitoring devices. His near-death experience had inspired him to apply his programming skills to cardiac health, much as Diane's experience had led her to medicine. Thank you for sharing my story, Marcus had written. Knowing that my experience might help other young people get diagnosed sooner makes everything I went through feel worthwhile. The next morning brought news that would reshape Diane's career trajectory once again. Dr. Sarah Kim, the former resident who had attended Diane's presentation years earlier, was now the director of a new adolescent cardiology program at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. She was offering Diane a position as the program's lead fellow, with the opportunity to develop the first comprehensive clinic specifically designed for teenagers with cardiac conditions. We need someone who understands not just the medical aspects, but the psychological and social challenges these young people face, Dr. Kim explained during their phone conversation. Your combination of clinical expertise and lived experience is exactly what this program needs. The position would allow Diane to focus entirely on the population she was most passionate about helping, teenagers whose cardiac symptoms were often dismissed or misunderstood. It was an opportunity to create the kind of program she wished had existed when she was 17 and desperate for someone to take her seriously. As Diane considered the offer, she thought about the teenager she'd been, frightened, dismissed, and convinced she was losing her mind. That girl could never have imagined that her terrifying medical crisis would ultimately lead to a career dedicated to preventing other young people from experiencing the same trauma. 3 months later, Diane stood in the bright, welcoming waiting room of the new Adolescent Cardiac Health Center at Children's National Hospital. The walls were decorated with inspiring quotes from young patients and colorful artwork that made the space feel more like a community center than a medical facility. Her first patient of the day was a 16-year-old soccer player named Jordan, whose symptoms included exercise-induced chest pain and palpitations. As Jordan's parents described months of dismissed concerns and accusations of attention-seeking behavior, Diane felt the familiar fire of determination. "Jordan," she said, looking directly at the teenager, "I want you to know that I believe you. We're going to figure out what's going on, and we're not going to stop until we have answers." As the appointment progressed, Diane realized that her journey had come full circle. The scared teenager who had once sat in an exam room begging to be taken seriously had become the doctor she'd needed all those years ago. But perhaps the most profound realization was that her story wasn't unique. Across the country, young people were fighting to be heard, advocating for their own health, and refusing to accept dismissive diagnoses. Some, like Diane, would find their voices and their calling through their struggles. Others would benefit from the advocacy work and systemic changes that patients like Diane had fought to implement. The teenage girl who had once been told to breathe normally had grown into a woman who was changing how the medical community breathed life into the concerns of young patients everywhere. Sometimes, the most powerful prescription isn't medication or surgery, it's simply being believed. And sometimes, the patients who seem the most difficult are actually the ones brave enough to keep fighting until they find the care they deserve. Diane Martinez had learned that lesson the hard way, and now she was making sure other young people wouldn't have to. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.